Google must crack open Android for third-party stores, rules Epic judge. Oh boy. If you haven't been keeping up, Epic, the creators of Fortnite, have been in multiple legal battles with both Apple and Google over who has the rights over both what apps you can use on your phones, as well as who can process those payments. In case you haven't kept up, both Apple and Google charge a 30% fee on every single transaction you do in an app that isn't for a real-life good or service. So if you're buying a laptop from Amazon.com, that doesn't eat the fee. If you're buying an Uber, which is a service, no fees are paid. But if you want to buy a microtransaction in a game, support your favorite indie developer, buy a movie in an app from some indie service, all of those things charge a 30% fee because those are considered digital goods. And all digital goods pay that fee. That means that effectively, huge businesses like Amazon, like Bank of America, and like Uber are not paying fees beyond the developer license fee to be on iOS or Android. Meanwhile, small indie devs making little games are paying all of those fees to subsidize these huge businesses. It's kind of absurd, and as much as I'm known for defending Apple, I think this is inexcusable. At the very least, you should be allowed to use other payment methods. Epic's been fighting this battle in court for a while, and it's gotten so chaotic that they're no longer just fighting to have a better payment processor. They're fighting to make their own app stores. So you might look at this and think, oh, but doesn't Android already support alternative app stores? Yeah, but there are some catches, and that's what this lawsuit is actually about. It's getting rid of the gotchas that make those third-party app stores not really viable. And this is going to be an interesting one. So let's dive in. Google's Android App Store is an illegal monopoly, and now it will have to change. Pretty nuts that this has been officially ruled to be an illegal monopoly. The jury ruled that Google has that illegal monopoly in this fight. Big deal. Today, the judge issued his final ruling in the Epic versus Google case, ordering Google to effectively open up the Google Play App Store to competition for 3 whole years. Google will have to distribute rival third-party app stores within Google Play, and it must give rival third-party app stores access to the full catalog of Google Play apps unless developers opt out individually. That is a huge change. Previously, if you wanted to install a third-party app store, you would have to find the APK file for it, turn off all the protections on your phone, eat a bunch of warnings. If you have a phone that even lets you, there was a while where there was a couple Samsung phones that wouldn't let you install third-party apps at all, and many of them will still warn you constantly. One of the terrifying things here is that Android has a bit of a security mess, and they've had to lock down these third-party app installations because of that, because the security is such a shit show. I've seen so many, admittedly, like older, non-technical people with Android phones that are covered in the nastiest fucking viruses. Like their lock screen becomes a bunch of ads and shit because of these random apps that they accidentally installed taking over their devices. So Google, for reasons I think are reasonable, has been trying to restrict how easy it is to install apps that aren't on the App Store, because ideally, the Google Play Store will have a safe set of applications. Now that has been pushed on, because Epic was upset that they couldn't reasonably get their apps installed. I don't know if that's covered in here. If not, we'll find examples of that. You know what? I'm going to find those examples quick. Interesting. So I know a lot of this was around Android often restricting third-party installations and making it a whole process to do it. What I didn't realize until reading through this is the things that this case is really focused on, specifically that there were deals being made between Google and other phone manufacturers in order to make sure Play Store stayed the default on all Android phones. Specifically, the Google Play App Store and billing services had an illegal tie, as well as the distribution agreements that they had with game developers and other phone manufacturers. This is something I did not realize was that big of a deal. That's huge. Hinged on these secret sharing deals between Google and smartphone manufacturers and big game developers, ones that Google execs internally believed were designed to keep rival app stores down. It shows that Google was running scared of Epic specifically, and it was all decided by a jury, unlike the Apple ruling. Very interesting. This is a big deal, even more so than I initially thought. Holy shit. Apparently, the judge is not granting an anti-circumvention provision, just to be sure Google can't reintroduce the same problems through some alternative creative solution. We don't break the law injunctions. If you have a problem, you can come back, said the judge. Fun. So this might not be the last suit, because I know Google's going to try some crazy thing to get around this. So the official ruling says that Google has to distribute the third-party app stores within Google Play and give those app stores full access to all of the existing apps, which is a huge ruling. That's a big change that makes things like the Epic Store much more viable on Android. These were Epic's big asks, and they might change the Android app marketplace forever if they aren't immediately paused or blocked on appeal. And that's not all that Epic won today. Starting from November 1st of this year up until 2027, Google also has to stop requiring Google Play billing for apps distributed on the Google Play Store. The jury found that Google has illegally tied its payment system to the App Store. The fact that the jury ruled this means Epic can now go retry this with Apple, because previously it was unclear whether or not Apple had the right to be an exclusive payment processor on iOS. This is huge. Just for reference, I mentioned Google and Apple take 30%. Stripe is probably the most popular payment processor in the world. They handle everything for you: invoicing, credit card, subscriptions, all the legal compliance bullshit. Not taxes, which is annoying, but everything else they do. 2.9% plus a 30-cent fee per successful charge for a credit card. That is significantly cheaper, like significantly cheaper than a 30% fee. If you have a $10 transaction on Google or Apple's app stores, or inside of an app that's digital good, you're paying $3 to Google and Apple. If you use Stripe instead, you're paying 30 cents plus 30 cents. So 60 cents versus $3. You see why people want to use this instead. It makes all the sense in the world. And right now, Google and Apple don't have to be competitive on price because they've made themselves the actual only option. You will be banned from the app stores if you don't use their payment processing, even if you offer an alternative. Epic offered a discount on the amount of V-Bucks you got in Fortnite if you use their payment processing. Instantaneously banned from iOS, not only banned from the App Store, but developer machines at Epic had their computers locked, so they couldn't even use their Macs because Apple scorched earth, nuked everything that Epic had, which was insane, especially when you realize the long history Epic and Apple had. Like, one of the earliest Fortnite demos was at Apple's WWDC event. So that was unbelievable. That's just the first point, though. There's plenty more. They also are going to let Android developers tell users about other ways to pay from within the Play Store. That's a huge deal. Apple can no longer ban apps for allowing you to pay for them elsewhere, but they are not allowed to tell you in the app that you can go somewhere else. And even if they can, which I think the judge ruled they have to, they can only put the link in one place that has to be separate from where Apple's payment option is. It's very restrictive as to whether or not you can even tell people that there are other ways to pay, and usually you're not allowed to link directly to those, which is insane. They also let Android developers link to ways to download their apps outside of the Play Store. That's also huge. So explicitly, they're allowed to tell people about these other options, because that's the thing that Apple has never budged on. So seeing this case allow developers on Android to do it hopefully means this will happen on Apple as well. I really hate that this has to go to the courts, that these monopolies aren't allowing for competition to exist on their platforms, but I'm thankful the change is starting. Also, Android developers can set their own prices for apps irrespective of Play billing. So they can charge different amounts in different places, which is also a big deal. Something like Steam, for example, or Amazon, they require that they always have the cheapest price. So if you're on Epic Games Store and on Steam, you can't charge less money for the game on EGS because Steam will delist you. It's a whole thing. So seeing that this is called out explicitly in the ruling is really huge. Also awesome that Google is no longer allowed to share app revenue with entities that distribute Android apps or plan to launch an app store or app platform. So if I'm understanding this point correctly, it seems like there were companies that wanted to make app stores and Google offered revenue shares for them to not do it. Imagine like Samsung wants to push their app store really hard. Google doesn't want them to do that. So they say, okay, how about we give you a small cut of all the app purchases done on your phones instead? Now you don't have to spend all that time and money making your own app store. Isn't that a better deal? Yeah, this one's crazy, especially when you consider the financial incentive as an Android manufacturer. When I buy an iPhone, I'm not just paying for the iPhone. Like, does Apple make a profit when I purchase this? Sure. But they continue to make money off me every single month because I pay for my iCloud subscription, because I buy other Apple devices, because I buy things on the App Store. I spend money on my phone in a way that continues to make Apple money, which means two things. First, it means Apple has an incentive to make sure that my experience on this phone is good for a long time. So it's less likely they're going to do things like push an update that makes my phone slow or not honor my warranty because they're trying to get me to spend more money on a new phone. They make way more off of their services than off of the raw purchase of the phone, and they would much rather that I continue to use the phone. It seems like they're even moving off the yearly upgrade model entirely in the near future. The other interesting point here is that that's not the case in Android. The majority of Android phones aren't being sold or made by Google. They're being made by Kyocera, by Huawei, by Samsung, by all these other companies that don't make more money after you purchase the device, which means their incentive is to get you to buy a new one as soon as possible because that's where they make their money. If they were to start doing things like making their own app stores in order to try and make more money after the device is sold, Google would lose their benefit of making Android. So Google is doing whatever they can in order to prevent Android from getting fragmented in that way in order to make those companies more money, because their end goal is to make sure all Android phones are using Google services or the whole investment in Android wasn't worth it. They even call out here that they're not allowing Google to give device manufacturers or carriers money or perks to pre-install the Play Store, or for them to not pre-install rival stores, which is interesting because this ruling does not affect other companies. And I bet Epic can now go to Samsung, to Huawei, to all these other companies and say, hey, we'll pay you to put our app store in there. This is very interesting. I'm excited to see how this goes. They also are doing this for developers directly. So you cannot, or Google can no longer pay a dev to not launch their app on other stores. This is a very strict ruling. It's rare I see these things so clearly ironed out. Obviously, a lot of lessons were learned from the chaos that was the Apple case and how poorly Apple has been dealing with those rulings. Also, in the EU with the Digital Markets Act, which I will be straight up, is a terrible act that is not serving its goals whatsoever. Apple has fully worked around it in ways that are genuinely terrifying. I have a bunch of coverage of that if you're curious. It's cool to see the US ruling taking into account all the fucked shit Apple's doing there in order to make sure Google can't do it here. In Epic versus Google, Epic successfully argued that Google has created such a substantial array of deals with developers, carriers, and device makers that it was nearly impossible for rival stores to spring up. By blocking those sorts of deals and proactively helping rival app stores, it's possible some real competition to Google's monopoly could now arrive. Google will still have some control over safety and security as it opens up the Play Store to rival apps. The injunction says that Google can take reasonable measures that are strictly necessary and narrowly tailored and are comparable to how it currently polices the Google Play Store. Well, considering that they barely police the Google Play Store and it's full of actual fucking trash shovelware bullshit, good luck to them defending that. Epic has repeatedly argued that Google should not be able to deter third-party app stores through policing, so it's likely that Epic and Google will keep butting heads over this. There will be more lawsuits here for sure. Judge Donato is giving Google 8 months from now to come up with a system where a 3-person technical committee jointly chosen by Epic and Google reviewing any disputes. That system will also come with a way for developers to opt out of being listed in a rival Android app store. Interesting. I am curious to see who ends up on this technical committee, especially if there's like joint choosing between Epic and Google. I'm sure that won't be absolute fucking chaos. It's going to be a mess. This is going to be such an insane mess. I'm actually really excited to see how this unfolds. Epic didn't quite get everything they asked for, though. They wanted the judge to crack open Google Play for 6 years, not 3, and also allow users to sideload apps with a single tap, and for Google to stop being able to tie Android APIs to Google Play. That one's a big deal, too. There's APIs in Android directly tied to Google Play that you won't be able to access if you're not a Google Play Store app. This will be interesting. And the sideloading thing's a big deal, too. So one of the things Epic went after is a new feature in Samsung phones called Auto Blocker, which is a setting Samsung introduced to their mobile devices in October of 2023 as an opt-in feature that disables the user's ability to install apps from any source other than Google Play Store in the Samsung Galaxy Store. In July of 2024, Samsung reversed course and made Auto Blocker the default setting, requiring every user to change their device settings before they could download and install any app from third-party app stores or the web. It's a 21-step process to download an app outside of Play Store or Galaxy Store, mirroring Google's unknown sources process with multiple steps and scare screens. This is the same thing Apple was doing, where they had all these big scary screens whenever you did anything, saying, hey, we can't protect you anymore, as a way to try and get users to not convert, which is kind of insane. Autoblock undermines the jury's unanimous decision in Epic versus Google, specifically that Google entered into one or more agreements that unreasonably restrain trade in a relevant antitrust market, including agreements with OEMs that sell mobile devices. I will say that the nature of Android viruses is such that I understand why Samsung made this and made it a default. This is like grandma proofing your Android phones effectively. And I do understand why they did this, but having it be a 21-step process to turn it off is a bit absurd. And that level of absurdity is the biggest problem here. So why didn't they not get 6 years or more? Why is this only 3 years? The judge says that the provisions are designed to level the playing field for the entry and growth of rivals without burdening Google excessively. As competition comes into play and the network effects that Google Play unfairly enjoys are abated, Google should not be unduly constrained as a competitor. That is fair. Specifically that like some of those requirements, like they can't pay phone manufacturers, aren't being held on these third parties. So they should be able to compete fairly. But since they've competed unfairly for so long, there needs to be a window for these companies to catch up, which I think is a fair read and ruling here. Also, Amazon jumped in. If you guys don't know, Amazon's had a weird history with Android. The Amazon store was a bit of a mess, and all the Kindle devices were running Android for a while. I think most of the touchscreen ones still are, but there was hell that they went through for all that. And apparently they stepped in here to help Google's rivals. Even a corporate behemoth like Amazon could not compete with the Google Play Store due to network effects, said the judge, who cited a key piece of evidence from the trial, an internal Google presentation that suggested that Amazon would struggle with a chicken and egg problem of attracting both users and apps. To date, the Amazon App Store has not become a substantial competitor. But with access to the Google Play catalog of apps, Donato argues rival app stores will now have a fighting chance of getting off the ground. Google claims that this will cause a range of unintended consequences that will harm American consumers, developers, and device makers. It will appeal. And obviously, Epic is calling it a victory. These lawsuits started in 2020, which was specifically August 13th, which is the same day that Epic sued Apple. The game dev sprung a premeditated trap on both tech giants by attempting to bypass the 30% fee. I mentioned that before. Both companies kicked Fortnite off the app stores, which is crazy. Like, to this day, you cannot install Fortnite on an iPhone unless you're in the EU, you've set up the DMA stuff, and you're getting it through their Epic Games store, third party. Insanity. And Epic was ready with the free Fortnite campaign. That whole thing is nuts. Definitely check out my previous videos if you haven't. The Apple case was weird. They didn't win as hard as I honestly think they should have. Apparently, he's ethically bound in that case. Ethics statements. Oh, Sean's wife is employed by Apple as a video producer, so he therefore does not currently report on or edit stories about Apple products or Apple as a company. Interesting. Good to know. Appreciate him for calling that out. Good author to call those types of things out. It's worth noting the Google case took way longer. That Apple one was like within a year. This one's been multiple years. Apparently, this author spent 15 days reporting live from the courtroom, and he saw Epic show time and again that Google was running scared, didn't treat developers equally, and had something to hide. It's not hard to show Google's being evil nowadays, it feels like. The jury in the Epic Google case was thoroughly convinced. Last December, it reached the unanimous verdict that Google Play App Store and Google Play billing services were an illegal monopoly, and that many of the special deals it made with game devs and phone manufacturers were anti-competitive behavior. The judge warned that Google would pay for its behavior. We're going to tear the barriers down. It's just the way that it's going to happen, he said in the remedy hearings. He rejected Google's suggestion that meeting Epic's demands would take too much work, cost too much money, or were impossible to arrange without taking substantial time. I wish companies weren't so aggressive at pretending these things were hard, because now we can't trust them when things actually are hard. Like, Apple has things that are actually difficult to implement as a result of the DMA, but we can't trust them because they'll say everything is hard to fucking try and get out of it. Google has their coverage. Why we're appealing the Epic Games verdict. Oh boy. The Epic verdict missed the obvious. Apple and Android clearly compete. We will appeal and ask the courts to pause implementing the remedies to maintain a consistent and safe experience for users and developers as the legal process moves forward. I will offer a tiny bit of sympathy to Google here. It's unfair that Apple doesn't have to follow these same rules, that Google has to compete with Apple in Android versus iOS, period. But now there are rules that affect Google that don't affect Apple. That makes it harder for them to compete. And I can offer sympathies there. That does suck, and that is somewhat unfair. That doesn't mean Google shouldn't have to do this. It means Apple should too. But I can sympathize some amount. They call out that Apple and Google compete for consumers as well as for app developers. And Android's open, and there are other ways to get apps. It is worth calling out, like, these other app stores are something that American users have never been able to use on their iPhones. I agree. It sucks that they can't. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have these rules done. It means Apple should too. Apparently, the recent Epic lawsuit isn't this. They filed a second one a week ago about the third-party friction thing I showed earlier, where they're trying to make it hard to install those apps. That's going to be a fun one. Since the case is officially related, the same judge will be hearing that. That's a good sign for Epic that the same judge is covering that case too. Much more likely they will find success. Oh man, this is a fun one. Shout out to The Verge for writing this. Shout out to you for watching it. Until next time, peace nerds.